Patrick Moore, ex-founder of Greenpeace International, why did you leave this organization? What was the reasons?
When we began, we had green and peace, and the peace meant to save civilization from nuclear war. And the green, of course, means environment. As we moved through time, the green was kept and the peace was lost. And so finally, by 15 years later, I'm still a director of Greenpeace International, and I find my fellow directors are saying that humans are the enemies of nature. Humans are the enemies of the earth.
Okay.
And I cannot believe this, because humans are coming from the earth. We come from nature, like all the other animals and plants on this planet. We are part of nature. And ecology, which I have a PhD in ecology, the first lesson is we are all one life on this planet. And this thing of saying humans are the only bad species, like some kind of original sin, some kind of negative religion, I just can't buy. So I had to leave.
You had to leave. But you also say that Greenpeace is on a very bad direction. I mean, they are scaring people. They don't talk the truth. They only want to have members or paying contributors.
Yes, first I'd say that Greenpeace was eventually sort of hijacked by the political left. When the left sees power, they try to take it. And they took Greenpeace. Then they use sensation, misinformation, and fear to get money from people. It turned into just a fundraising organization. And they say about some kinds of organizations, they begin with very good intentions to save the planet or save the people, and then they become a business because now you have a payroll and you have to make money, and then maybe sometimes you just become a racket. You turn into like a mafia. And this is what's happened with Greenpeace today.
So what you say is Greenpeace is a kind of mafia?
Yeah, organized to take money from people's wallets.
A mafia organized to take...
Yeah, it's a metaphor, of course. They're not Italian, for one thing. But they do behave somewhat like a mafia, yes.
To take
like
the
a
money
gang.
out,
They're like a gang, yes.
An ecologic gang.
Exactly.
And do they have still ecology in their mind, or is this only something that they present to the people in order to get the money?
I believe ecology is only a word to them. They use it all the time, of course, but I don't think they understand it very well. I found myself, this was many years ago now, more than 30, when I had to leave, after being there in the top for 15 years as a scientist. When I left, I was the only director with science education. Every other one of the directors was either political activist, social activist on the left, or entrepreneur, because now you could make a living in the environmental movement. At the beginning, first 5 years, we were all volunteers. We made no money. We lived like peasants because of it, because it was our life. We wanted to do something about this problem of the environment back then. The rivers were poisoned, the air was poisoned. They were killing 30,000 whales every year, setting off atomic bombs and all of these things. And so that's what we started against, these things. But in a way, once you have solved those problems, the more difficult ones, then what are you going to be against? And now they just make things up.
They make things up.
They make up against GM foods, they make up against nuclear power, they make up against fossil fuels, they make up against pretty well everything.
So are they lying?
Yes.
They are lying?
Yes.
And they are lying to the people by inventing false apocalypse scenarios.
Yes, this is the misinformation, or even more purposefully, disinformation, on purpose giving bad information to people.
The people?
Yes.
Is it a kind of a company, a $1 billion company now?
I think it's $500 million a year, something like this.
So it's a huge company.
But they have bank accounts in the Caribbean, you know. They have money hidden away all over the place. And I'm hoping my late brother Michael, was right when he said that one day Greenpeace, yes, they will always be rich, but maybe they will lose their influence on public policy, sort of like Scientology. You know, Scientology was once quite influential with Hollywood actors and the people who were into these kind of fads. But today nobody thinks Scientology is important. They still are rich though.
Yes.
So maybe Greenpeace will go like this. That would be good.
So you compare Greenpeace to an aggressive religion like Scientology?
Correct.
That makes people dependent and creates special scenarios to fear people, to scare people?
Yes, fear is now the main motivating factor, along with guilt. It works like this. You're driving down the Autobahn with your children in your SUV, and you think, oh my God, I'm killing my grandchildren here by doing this with the exhaust from my car, and then that makes them afraid, and then that makes them feel guilty for what they're doing. So fear and guilt combined is a very powerful motivator to open your wallet and give money to people who say, we can help you with this problem. We can make this go away. Now your grandchildren will be safe, and you don't have to fear anymore because we will stop the fossil fuels. But meanwhile, the people are still driving in an SUV, and now they don't feel so bad and have given their money away. So it's sort of like taking wool from a lamb.
Pardon?
Taking the wool from a sheep.
The wool from the sheep.
It's called fleecing in English.
Okay, but they are constantly inventing, obviously, new stories. What I read, I think 1 year ago, was that the polar bears were in danger, and they have very dramatic photos, images of dying polar bears. But the truth is, for example, the Norwegian Polar Bear Organization says they haven't been in a better state than now. I mean, this is also something that they work with to make people fear, make people scared.
Yes, and no one can go up in the Arctic and count the polar bears by themselves, So every year this group of people who call themselves polar bear scientists, who are getting big government grants in the US especially, they go up to the Arctic and they look around, and I don't know what they study. They come back, they say, oh my goodness, it's even worse this year than last. We need more money to go again next year. We must go back.
But as a matter of fact, also in Canada, what I read is that the polar bears are enjoying a very good life, even better than before.
Of course they are. All around the Arctic, there are maybe 5 times as many polar bears today than there were in 1970. The main reason for this is that in 1973, a treaty was signed with all the Arctic countries, Russia, Norway, Canada, etc. They all signed a treaty to stop unrestricted hunting of polar bears. Before then, there was no control on hunting polar bears, so they had been reduced to a smaller number, 6,000 they said. Today there are at least 30,000 polar bears, so they have increased greatly, and yet they are still saying, oh yes, they've increased, but they could be endangered in the future, so you have to give us more money to go and study them again next year. They just keep saying this every year, serial grants for life until they retire, these guys. But there are some honest polar bear scientists like Susan Crockford, who is lives on the same island as me, Vancouver Island, a big island, and she has studied these bears all her life too, and she is telling the truth about them. Same with the walruses. The walrus, there's very healthy populations of walrus, and they say, oh, they're not getting enough ice. They need more ice. No, walruses don't need more ice. They need a place where they can go down in the shallow water and dig for clams with their tusks. So they don't want ice, really.
Okay.
Because the Arctic has ice, they sit on it.
But I want to come back to the point of the beginning
Yes.
that we were referring about. You said that Greenpeace has nothing to do with science, or had from a certain point on nothing to do with science anymore. It's only a political organization.
Yes, and the problem there, I think, was when we took on the toxic issue. In 1975, the rivers of Europe were mostly poisoned and dead by factories putting their waste in there. And we were responsible with a riverboat called the Beluga for bringing this to the public's attention. But the problem is, like with whales, you don't need to be a marine biologist to have a good reason to save the whales. You don't even need to be a nuclear physicist to be against nuclear weapons. It's obvious. But if you're going to deal with toxic chemicals, you need some science, because there are some toxic chemicals which are beneficial, and chlorine is the one that comes to mind, and that was actually one of the reasons I had to leave Greenpeace. Is my fellow directors, none of whom had any science education, decided we should ban chlorine worldwide. Well, chlorine is the most important element for public health and for medicine. Adding it to drinking water is the biggest advance in the history of public health, save more people from disease than anything else we've ever done.
Yeah, so they were against it. But how would you describe the situation at Greenpeace now? Are there...
Oh, they have left science behind so many years ago.
so many years
All
ago.
they are is propaganda now, and they invent new issues like this plastic waste,
Yes.
right? They say there is a sea of plastic 2 times the size of Texas in the Pacific Ocean. And then they draw a picture on the internet with Photoshop to show these big patches of plastic. It's not real, they're doing it, photoshopping it. And then because if you take a picture from NASA of the Pacific Ocean from space with no clouds, you can't see anything.
Yeah, of
But you
course.
see the Hawaiian Islands, and they are not twice the size of Texas. They're only small. Yet there's nothing there. And then if you bust them on it, if you say, come on, you guys are lying. I've looked, there's no plastic garbage twice the size of Texas out there. They say, well, actually, it's mostly clear plastic. It's not the colored plastic, it's the clear plastic.
Okay, so we cannot see it.
And it's just below the surface.
And so,
It's just below the surface, so you can't see it. Well,
but they can draw a picture of it.
yes, but things in the ocean either float or they sink.
Yeah.
They don't go 5 inches down below the surface and stay there. A submarine can do that because they control their buoyancy. But a piece of plastic is either light enough to float or too heavy to float. And so they totally lie when you catch them on this. And then they say, well, actually, it's only microplastic. Now the sea of plastic is made of plastic so small you can't see it because it's microplastic. That's how they work.
Yeah. Now also the CO2 issue and fossil energy is also a thing that they are fighting against. That is also essential for the world. I mean, we cannot live without producing CO2.
Well, we also cannot live without CO2 for the plants to use as their main food. And so all life, it depends on CO2. The carbon in all life is from CO2, doesn't come from anywhere else, only from CO2. And CO2 has actually been declining very much over the last 150 million years because life has been sucking it up and putting it on the bottom of the ocean in the form of calcium carbonate. The shells of corals and sea creatures are sinking to the bottom, taking carbon with them. That carbon came from CO2. So actually we have a shortage of CO2, and it was a good thing that humans came along to put some back in the atmosphere again. Because all the CO2 we are emitting into the atmosphere from fossil fuels came from the atmosphere in the first place, because all the fossil fuels are made with photosynthesis. They're made with solar energy. They are all plants which were turned into coal and oil and gas, either marine plants or land plants. The coal is from forests, much of the oil and gas is from plankton in the sea, but it's all from life. So fossil fuels are 100% solar created from life origin. They are organic because they are carbon compounds, and that is organic chemistry is the chemistry of carbon. So they are organic, and when you burn them, they produce CO2 and water, which is what they were made from in the first place.
Okay. Do you have the impression that Greenpeace and all the other NGOs become more and more aggressive in order to fear people?
I would say more hysterical now
Hysterical.
because I think they are losing. I think they are losing the minds of intelligent people.
You sure?
I hope so, because they should be, because they're lying, and it's basically a big hoax that our fossil fuels are going to end the world. Our fossil fuels are making the earth greener all around the globe. And NASA supports this. The scientists in Australia and China support this. China and India are actually causing more greening by planting new trees than anywhere else in the world. And this is contributing to taking some of the CO2 out of the atmosphere and turning it into life. And then we can use the wood from those trees, which grow all across the planet, in order to build our tables and houses, and big apartments even can be made of wood now. They've learned how to do this. But the Greens, they don't even recognize that wood is the most important renewable resource in the world, both for building and for energy. Because still 2 billion people use wood as their main source of heat for cooking and heating their homes in parts of the world. And of course, wood is used for construction.
Of course.
What else is, what other building material is renewable besides wood?
Okay.
Really none.
Last sentence. What would you describe Greenpeace now? How would you describe this organization?
A parasite on the society. That's how I describe them, a parasite on our society.
Patrick Moore, thank you very much for your statements.
Thank you, Michael.